Okay then, Roma. As a pitch, based on the director's own experiences, is an immediate turn-off for me, as I am repelled by the egotistical notion that of all the 7 billion people on Earth whose story you might use your ultra-privileged position to bring to your attention, you felt the most worthy was... you? I'm also not a huge fan of Alfonso Cuarón, having grown slightly more contemptuous over time of his reliance on technical camera trickery and forced pseudo-profundity in the likes of Children of Men and Gravity. Who's in Gravity again? Though I profess to having never watched Y Tu Mama Tambien, or Harry Potter and the Naughty Step What's It for that matter. Therefore, with some trepidation and naught else to do of that particular night, I fired up Netflix and battened down the hatches for 2 hours and 15 minutes of pretentious arsehouse flannel before reuniting myself with the sweet embrace of bed. Except I was pretty much wrong in my entire supposition as to what Roma is, or indeed sets out to achieve. Yes, the 10-year-old Alfonso is present in some form in this movie, but the director sidelines himself with admirable restraint in a tale that focuses instead on his family's housemaid Cleo as she tended to the Cuarón's home against the backdrop of social and political change in Mexico City circa 1971. The film spans about a year, during which time both Cleo and the family experience fundamental changes to the fabric of their being, chief among them Cleo's pregnancy, and, to a lesser degree, the departure of the household patriarch who abandons his wife and 4 children for a younger woman. So far, so Ken Loach. However, there is a great deal which sets Roma apart, most immediately obvious amongst those things, and gratifying, being the cinematography, for which Cuarón is also responsible on this occasion. Presented in beautifully graded black and white, Roma wastes no time in establishing a very definite sense of place and time, and every single shot is perfectly framed to within a pixel of its life. Despite its humble aspirations and beautifully mundane setting, this is up there with Blade Runner or Lawrence of Arabia as one of those films where you could capture a still at pretty much any moment and be absolutely justified in mounting it and hanging it on a wall.
Even when that's cleaning up dog.
Yes, even when it's scraping up dog. There's a lot of dog in this movie, Scott. Then, as the movie bedded in, I came to appreciate that the cinematography is kept pace by the characterisation, and that my initial feelings about the treatment of Cleo by the adults in the house, that she seems a victim of poverty and class, were at least partly misplaced. Cuarón so clearly has such unending affection for his nanny that my reservations around the whole based on director blah blah thing were roundly binned, and I came to realise that he was playing to just about every strength his privileged position afforded him in telling this story of a quietly, unassumingly, galactically noble woman, and not playing in the wise or manipulative sense, but rather a disarmingly affectionate one. That is not to say that Roma is a love-in or a laugh fest, as their compassion for Cleo comes at a dramatic price. There are moments in the movie, particularly on the back nine, where it can be downright punishing, and at least 2 of those moments left me moved to tears. I don't think I've had this particular emotional experience before in a film. Brett Goldstein, on his excellent Films to be Buried With podcast, recently likened it to feeling guilty at intruding on a private moment of grief, which pretty much sums up the most devastating scene in question. Likewise, Cuarón deploys his trademark technical trickery in a much more reserved and transparent way here, and in particular a scene taking place at the beach later in the movie uses it to leverage a moment of profound emotional catharsis for Cleo, a technological achievement you absolutely never have to worry about applying to Gravity. Ultimately, I was absolutely humbled by Roma, and that was despite only watching it on a small screen. This is a film that begs to be seen in a cinema, and also having to stop for half an hour at the 45-minute mark while I enacted an emergency repair on the impeller assembly of our overworked dishwasher. While the nature of it means I am in no rush to see it again unless I can catch a cinema screening a year or so from now, there's a pretty good objective case to be made for Roma as the year's best crafted piece of cinema.
Yes. Had this been released before we'd recorded our Best of 2018 podcasts?
Yes.
Sorry to look behind the curtain, that was a little bit in advance. Yeah, this would certainly have been on it, so yes, it's...
I too felt like a mug that we didn't speak about this in December.
Yeah, so rectifying that now, and no doubt in our roundup next year, it is absolutely fantastic. To return to my most abused Garth Marenghi Dark Place quote, Cuarón's one of those cowardly authors that uses subtext, so one of the things that I can really like about this is, while the central narrative is, you could argue, relatively straightforward, it is nonetheless, a beautifully crafted, but it's a beautifully crafted cork that's swirling around in a tempest of cultural attitudes and change that I am not qualified to tell you about, in a language of film that I am not qualified to tell you about. So all I can really tell you is that it's absolutely fantastic. There's lots of things to dive into with Roma that aren't being sort of formed into plot cudgels to beat you with, like the relationship between paid employees and a family, and the blurred boundaries between the roles, and the feints towards the male role in a family, the class standings in society, and the lasting impact of government oppression that, to my understanding, in Mexico has never even had the small catharsis of proper investigation and recognition the way that they have in, for example, similar events in Argentina. The dirty war in Mexico seems to have gone somewhat under-analysed as opposed to some of the other more totalitarian states that have had a little bit more light shown on it. So, it's just such an intensely powerful and personal story that affects Cleo, and it's a hell of a performance from Yalitza Aparicio.
Gosh, yes.
Which holds everything together. It's wide-ranging, and it's heartbreaking, and it's intimate, and it's funny in its places, and it's absolutely heartbreaking in others, and it's absolutely beautiful.
It's as close to transcendent as the medium has gotten for some time, I think, or certainly in my experience. I was listening to... Oh, no, I wasn't listening to, actually. I'll tell you what, of all things, it was one of those... the second part of that two-part series that Billy Connolly has done for the BBC recently, where he revisits Scotland. And he was away up in the north talking to an English singer-songwriter who's basically moved up there to live a life as almost a vagabond, kind of on-the-road musician. And he said something that applies to this. I think it speaks to the elegance and the depth that Cuarón brings in this film to seemingly sort of trivial events. And he was speaking about songwriting, and he was talking about the real craft of songwriting and what makes a great songwriter. And he spoke about how frequently the charts and how often, what percentage of songs in the charts are about being in love or having your heart broken, as though this is the sort of thing that happens 5 or 6 times a day to us. He said a great songwriter will take something mundane like eating an apple and bring some sort of profound expression to that through the medium of music. And it's that kind of expression that Cuarón has brought to small... In a real sense trivial, but and also in a real sense absolutely profound moments that he's dearie me, he's elevated in this film to as much more than the sum of its parts, and just the most genuinely moving and affected I've been by a film in some time. Which is not to say that I expelled as much volume of tears as I did bizarrely in something like Coco. It's not that. It's just that it's a profoundly human film, and I felt connected to the lead character in a much more fundamental way than I have done any other character in a film that I can remember, certainly in recent memory. So I mean, this should be winning all of the things. And if we talk about if we talk about the quality of Netflix's output in variable films, this is the jewel in Netflix crown right now in terms of its film output. Certainly it's up there with the best. And what would I did have, oh yes, if I did have one warning, if I did have one criticism, if for any reason you're allergic to panning, there's a lot of panning in this film. You'll understand if and when you watch it. But bizarrely enough, I wish I hadn't actually seen it in the comfort of my home. I really wish I'd been able to see this at a screening at a local cinema, and I would urge you to do that. Even if you're a Netflix subscriber, I would urge you to pay £12 to go and see it at a cinema instead. Quite remarkable.